So the Nigerian economy, once again at the front of the stage and in the headlights, with some of the most powerful forces pulling the biggest strings in the country's financial system, coming together under the auspices of the central bank to consider the best way forward. The forum, known as the Consultative Going for Growth Roundtable, has been taking place in Abuja, attempting to find ways to stimulate growth against the backdrop of the challenges of rising inflation, growing poverty, and diversifying an oil-dependent economy, not to mention the recent dramatic plunge in the price of oil and the sharp falls in markets around the world amid jitters about the coronavirus epidemic. Well, in a moment, we'll assess the projections for Nigeria's economy and public-private finances and consider the implications for the country of the instability in world markets. But first, here's the governor of the Nigerian Central Bank setting out what he hopes the consultative roundtable session is aiming to achieve.
The management of the Central Bank of Nigeria decided to convene a second session in Abuja, working in partnership with key stakeholders in the public sector. And I say this is the real time to hold this. And like we all know what is happening today in the world. I therefore have no doubt in my mind that with the caliber of people from both the public and private sector gathered here today, we will make the desired progress in generating ideas and solutions that will enable greater growth and development of our dear country. This session is more relevant today than ever before, given the external headwinds that the Nigerian economy faces, such as the effects of the trade and technology wars, and more importantly, the recent, indeed current spread of coronavirus, which has emerged as a major threat to global growth in 2020 and perhaps beyond. The impact of the coronavirus across over 100 countries has affected global supply chains as well as demand for goods and services. Commodity prices have also been affected as crude oil prices have plummeted by over 45% since January 2020. Early this year, the IMF had projected that global growth would rise to 3.3% in 2020, up from 2.9% in 2019. However, with the onset of the virus, global growth is now expected to decline in 2020, but the extent of the decline will depend on how the epidemic is contained over the coming months. Central banks in key markets across the globe have responded by reducing policy rates in order to stimulate growth, while measures are being taken by fiscal authorities to build resilient buffers to contain the spread of the virus. But again, let me assure all of us as Nigerians that only 2 days ago, President Muhammadu Buhari constituted a committee headed by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning to carry out an assessment of the impact not just of the coronavirus but also of the trade wars on Nigeria and profile a solution. But I want to assure all of us as Nigerians that in the coming days, both the monetary and the fiscal authorities will come together and we will bring out to Nigerians and the world our own recipe of solutions to these problems. The central bank, fortunately, had already embarked on similar measures, which has resulted in significant reduction in lending rates as part of our efforts to boost growth. Working with the fiscal authorities, we will not hesitate to deploy additional measures to strengthen our buffers and insulate the Nigerian economy from the global headwinds.
The governor of Nigeria's central bank, Godwin Emefiele, there. Well, for more on that roundtable Going for Growth session. I'm joined now by two people who took part in that event. Mustafa Chike Obi is the former chief executive of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON, and he's currently executive vice chairman of Alpha African Advisory, a primary investment advisory firm in West Africa. And Barbara James is the founder and CEO of Henshaw Capital Partners, which is a private equity firm. She's also a consultant to the World Bank on infrastructure finance. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. And I will naturally start with the lady first. Tell us the point of this roundtable session from your point of view.
Thank you for having me, first of all. The CBN Going for Growth roundtable this time was the second in its edition. The first was about a year ago. And the idea is for the private sector and key industry stakeholders to be able to contribute to CBN and the larger government policy going forward. Whatever government wants to do, they know that the private sector is the engine of the economy. And so we need to be involved in creating, crafting solutions, and also we'll be on hand to help implement some of those solutions.
Mustafa Chike Obi sounds like a broken record, doesn't it? I mean, I've heard it all before. It's like something stuck on fast forward. And I think Aliko Dangote was making the same point earlier today. He was also at that event. I mean, how did it rub you up the right way or the wrong way?
Well, it's always a good thing when the government interacts with the private sector. And the fact that you've done something correctly 10 times and it hasn't borne fruit doesn't mean you shouldn't do this correctly the 11th time. I think what I have found, as many people know, I have not been an advocate for this government for a while. In fact, I was an adversary during the elections. But I have noticed that in the last year or so, the government is much more willing and open to ideas from all sides. And so I think that we will see more out of these kind of things, because I think the government has more of a listening ear. And I think that the urgency is so much now that any good ideas, no matter where they come from, will be listened to and taken seriously. So I'm very hopeful that this will lead in the right direction. And
when you say urgency, are you talking about urgency within the last few weeks, the crisis of the, the various crises that the world is facing, or are you talking about the fact that they've come to realize after 4 years in office that they haven't actually done anything with the economy?
I would hate to say that, but I think that the urgency for the Nigerian economy has been there for the last more than 4 years. I think even during the time of the Jonathan government, I was worried at the fact there are some things that are insidious, that take time to show up. And one of the insidious things is that we cannot have a population growth that exceeds our GDP growth for a long period, and we've had that for a long period of time, even before this. So I think that all this is a lightning blow. It highlights the dangers we're in, but this was bound to happen. We're bound to be in an urgent economic situation.
But this country has been in an urgent economic situation for a very long time. I mean, for as far back as I can remember, coming to Nigeria, doing programs in this country, it's been the same recurring theme.
That's correct, but perhaps you can say that the actors have changed, have evolved, and are evolving. So there are new people in place, both in government and in the private sector. There are new understandings, new thinking, and hopefully this time round we will begin to see more of implementation and the desired results.
I mean, were you inspired by this event today? Did it seem like it was on track to come up with the right idea and policies that will stimulate growth, or was it just another talking shop, to use a well-worn cliche there?
It's difficult to say, and I think we'll be able to say that in hindsight, a few years down the line. It is necessary. Today's event was very necessary, bringing together the public sector, the private sector. We had the ministers of finance, of trade and investment, power, transport, sat alongside the chief executives of banks and financial institutions.
Yeah, so very high-powered people there, to be honest. I saw
alongside some CEOs of pharmaceutical companies and so on. So the caliber and quality of people gathered was really good. The ideas were also really good. And, you know, we have to be creative. We have to look for new solutions. We are now in the digital economy, and so some of the solutions available to us now were not available 30 years ago. And so these are the sorts of things that we're trying to harness and to anchor in order to allow the economy to grow.
And Mustafa Chikobi, we've got less than a minute, so if I have to interrupt you, I probably will, because we've got to take a break, but we'll come back and you can continue talking. I mean, is this something the central bank should be doing, or is it better off focusing on its core mandate, which is defending monetary policy? I mean, shouldn't it be the Economic Advisory Council or something that's doing this, or some other branch of government?
Well, I have always said that the Central Bank of Nigeria is probably the most efficient public institution in Nigeria. And therefore, many things that it technically shouldn't be doing, it has to do, because there's a gap in competence and ability and financing.
But that then raises the question of whatever solutions you come up with at this event, how is that going to be implemented if you've got, you know, discombobulation, disconnection across the entire government network?
Those are your words.
Yeah,
not
those
mine.
are my words, and I stand by them.
I wouldn't speak so strongly. The fact is that the financial engine for the economy sits at the central bank today. And when there's a gap in expertise, they are reluctant to spend their money and see it not get the desired results. So yes, they are doing a lot more things that they should not be doing technically, but they have to be done.
Okay, I'll come straight back to you. I've got to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the roundtable on Going for Growth, organized by the Nigerian Central Bank. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyekolu. Now, the economy is one thing that persistently matters in Nigeria and indeed in every country in the world. The state of the economy, the jobs market, unemployment, the cost of food, the electricity crunch, transportation, the availability of credit, the backlog of demand for housing and all the rest of it, all issues under discussion at that round table. The signs are never good when the unemployment rate is sharply higher, incomes are lower, and the economic downturn holds back expansion, dragging many more people into hunger and poverty. So, have the risks to the Nigerian economy diminished or deepened? And is there any prospect that rising demand for jobs and income will improve anytime? Or that there is a credible and well thought out economic plan that will make things better going forward? We'll talk about that in a moment, but first, here's a bit more from that central bank roundtable consultative session.
Well, as you know, with the crash of the oil price today, it is imperative that we diversify this economy. The diversification of this economy is very, very important. And in fact, we are late, because like what I said, since when I got to Lagos in 1979, people have been talking about diversification of Nigeria's economy. How do you diversify your economy? You have to diversify your economy and make it great through agriculture and manufacturing. Manufacturing actually, creates a lot of jobs, creates middle class, and also transform countries. These are the areas that I think we need to really focus on. But, how do you diversify an economy? I'm going into manufacturing that makes sense and also makes it inclusive growth. Then you need to actually do what you call backward integration or import substitution. Our economy is great because we have a local market. Because when you look at the economy of Asia, is mainly focused on export. But we have a domestic market. This is a country with about 200 million people, apart from the rest of the ECOWAS market, where our imports last year was almost $47 billion. It is not sustainable. We cannot have 200 million people growing at an average, population growth at about 2.7%, and then we're importing most of the things that we're consuming. I think we need to really, this time around, be more serious so that we just don't keep talking about diversification. And it has been very elusive. I don't know why. It is possible, but people are not really focusing on that. So I think we need to really look at, okay, fine, how do we fully this time around, the kind of people that I've seen here, I'm sure we'll find solutions as to how do we actually make our country to be producing things that we consume.
Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man there. And with me in the studio, the former chief executive of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON, Mustafa Chike Obi, who's currently executive vice chairman of Alpha African Advisory, a primary investment advisory firm in West Africa, and the founder and CEO of Henshaw Capital Partners, a private equity firm, Barbara James, who's also a consultant to the World Bank on infrastructure finance. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And just listening to Dangote speak there, I mean, that's what we're talking about. You know, this is something that's been going on for a very long time. You could see the frustration in his face, having come back several times to talk about the same thing. You know, it's a worrying thing, isn't it?
Well, if I may say, there's a number of things that I believe hold back the Nigerian economy, and we have to be pushed against the wall to deal with those things. We have to deal, and nobody wants to hear this, with the appropriate level of our currency. I was in a discussion with a very senior retired Federal Reserve official in the US. We were colleagues at Goldman. And he said to me, he said, Nigeria's policies encourage exportation of capital. He goes, you guys export 90% of the capital you make in Nigeria, and you export it.
That's a very good point.
Says you export it through buying foreign goods,
absolutely,
buying homes in England, buying homes in America, because most Nigerians who can afford it send their children to school abroad. So all the capital that we earn here, even the capital we earn from exporting crude oil, we export the capital. He says, so you're asking us to bring capital in when the behavior of your country is to export capital. And so we must deal with the fact that nobody will give you $1 at 360 if they believe, rightly or wrongly, that that dollar is worth 400 naira. So, and we're saying, just give it to us at 360. And they're saying, no, I won't give it to you at 360. In fact, the Nigerians that are getting it at 360 are buying homes abroad because 360 seems like a good deal for exporting capital. So we must deal with the appropriate level of the currency to encourage capital importation and discourage capital exportation. It's an elephant in the room and nobody wants to talk about it. And I've gotten tired of talking about it. The appropriate level of our currency is the critical element in financing all the things we want to do.
Did you mention that at your sort of part of the discussion? Because you took, I mean, you were a panelist there.
Part of my panel was not supposed to address that. It was supposed to address.
I like that. Well, that's a critical thing. You talked about it as being critical.
No, it's absolutely critical. I've been singing that song for many years. I think that if we want to err, given the kind of country we are, we should err on the side of a weaker currency, not a stronger one, if there's an error.
Well, obviously there are political considerations as well, aren't there? I mean, it's a bit like saying you're going to remove subsidy on petrol. I mean, that's an important thing to remove, but there are political considerations that, you know, reproaches that hold them back. What do you reckon, Barbara?
I'd like to speak to institutionalizing our development. And by this I mean, if you look at the financial landscape, for example, that needs to be diversified, and it has been diversified over time. I'll give you an example of the microfinance banks. 30 years ago, we did not have microfinance banks. Since 2005, we now have hundreds of microfinance banks, and they're doing a great job making sure that capital reaches the grassroots. 30 years ago, we did not have pension funds administrators. All our pensions were managed by the government, supervised by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Basanjo came in and we reformed the pension system and set up a pensions industry. Today, that industry has over 10 trillion naira in assets under management that can be deployed in many different things, including infrastructure.
But it isn't being deployed, though, is
well,
it?
it is being deployed, but not enough of it. And there are reasons why not enough of it is being deployed. And I want to expand that to investment financing. There are professionals whose job it is to intermediate institutional investors, both local and international, and channel that money through to the domestic economies, to businesses, entrepreneurs, startups who need the capital to grow their businesses and thereby grow the economy.
But I mean, what
this
about
is
the
an area
consideration
we
of
have
what
not
he's
looked
talking
at.
about?
This is an area we have not
Sure.
looked at. He spoke to the...
I mean, in the context of what you're saying.
Well,
you see
absolutely.
what I mean?
Absolutely. There are first things first. If your currency is mispriced,
Right.
and you are looking for international investors, you will have a problem. They will not come. It's very simple, and we can look to other jurisdictions where this has been the case. But I'm believing that that will be resolved. We have the resources and the brain power to resolve that in time. And beyond that, we need to expand our intermediary capacity and build up the industry that intermediates capital, and that's the private investment industry.
Well, it's brilliant to listen to both of you, because I mean, you're just so clued on. But my problem has always been that you've got these events and they take place, and you've got people like you who bring tremendous quality to these events, and for some reason, I mean, it's been recurring for years. I mean, does it help when people like you are on board? Is it harder for the CBN and the government to distance itself from any, what they might consider tricky recommendations that it might not like, or they might not like?
Well, I think everybody knows my position. And so when...
Well, I'm not quite sure what your position is anymore, because I
My
mean,
po- my
a
posi-
few
my-
months
my- my
ago,
position
you were
is-
lambasting the government, and now you're saying that the government's a jolly nice,
No, no.
bunch of people to have coffee or tea with.
I'm saying the same thing.
Right.
In the context of an election, which is adversarial, then we have adversarial conversations, because that's what an election is.
Sure.
After the election, everybody must come on board and contribute to the country, because it's all our country. So the adversarial tone during election doesn't necessarily mean that the ideas have changed.
No, I totally understand.
The
what you're
ideas
saying.
are
Yes.
the same.
And I agree with you.
And the fact that the CBN is inviting somebody like me tells you that they know that I'm going to tell them,
Like it
subtly
is.
or not subtly, that the currency issue has to be addressed.
Right.
They know that I am for growth. Let's grow the economy. So the theme going for growth, and the governor mentioned double-digit growth, which has been my mantra for years. It comes with a cost. And all the economists know the cost of pursuing growth. Growth gives you jobs, it gives you employment, it gives you prosperity over the long run. But in the short run, it may create inflation, it may create a weaker currency, it has some negative effects in the short run. But the fact that people are now willing to listen and consider, there's been a lot of progress in the ability of the government to listen.
But
So
the CBN isn't going to allow the currency to go the way that you're saying, because I mean, its core mandate is to keep inflation down and to, keep a check on monetary policy, and that's just going to they're just simply not going to do it.
I'm not so
Well,
sure.
I don't think we can sit here and be so certain
Right.
about that. Things
not so
evolve,
sure.
things
Thank you.
change. Remember, we didn't have the coronavirus 3 months ago, and now we are in a situation where we really do need to think outside the box. So I wouldn't be too certain about that. I'm sure they look at the situation from time to time and decide what's best for the economy.
So what do you think is best for the economy?
I think what's best is to look to long-term growth and not to use this crisis or any other crisis for short-term one-off solutions. And I think we do that quite too much. we need to look to building industries, building systems,
Okay.
and not one-off solutions.
I'll come back to you in a minute. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the roundtable on Going for Growth, organized by the Nigerian Central Bank. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Clarity and coherence of economic policy, that is partly what the Going for Growth roundtable, organized by the Nigerian Central Bank, is trying to articulate. Nigeria is confronted with major economic issues: rising debt, rising unemployment, deepening poverty, and little evidence of improvement on the horizon. And so the central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele, brought together some of the biggest names in the public and private sectors to take account and consider the most appropriate policy arrangements to underpin a program of sustainable growth in Africa's biggest economy and most populous nation. But as the economic clock is reset around the world by the irrepressible coronavirus and governments scramble to cope, how does a country like Nigeria put in place a trenchant policy that will starve the beast without killing its prey as well? More on that in a hot second. But first, let's listen in to a bit more from that roundtable session organized by the central bank.
Well, for all of us in this room, we have a responsibility to make sure that we don't spread panic, that we don't allow speculation, because that is what triggers a spiral which will not be in the favor of our country. We need to all put our hands together to weather this storm. This is not something that government can do alone, nor is this something that the private sector can do alone. It has to be a partnership, a very strong one. We need to work together to take the opportunities that this same crisis has provided for us. For us in government, there are some measures that we need to take which we have not taken, and this is the right time to take those measures. We're working as a government to strengthen our macroeconomic fundamentals, which some sectors of the economy were already weak before the crisis, so the crisis is only exacerbating the situation, and we knew about that, and we're working at dimensioning each sector and fashioning out and prioritizing the sectors, how best to provide fiscal incentives for the sectors to grow. There is no doubt that the combination of the crude oil crash and the coronavirus has put a very significant strain on the national budget, also on foreign exchange and also on many sectors. So we have been formed into a team, as said earlier by the CBN governor, by the president, to review what is the impact of the crisis on the national budget and also on various sectors of the economy, and to provide recommendations on how we can raise the revenue from the non-oil sector, block leakages, pull back whatever we have been doing that is not necessary, defer some actions, and prioritize and fast-track others.
And with me in the studio, the former Chief Executive of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON, Mustafa Chike Obi, who is currently Executive Vice Chairman of Alpha African Advisory, a primary investment advisory firm in West Africa, and the founder and CEO of Henshaw Capital Partners, a private equity firm, Barbara James. She's also a consultant to the World Bank on infrastructure finance. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. And of course, one of the great areas of challenge, beyond of course the coronavirus that she's talking about, which is hardly making a ripple in Nigeria, let's be honest, but one of the areas of great challenge to the Nigerian economy is electricity and the power pinch. Clearly that area has not delivered. What emerged or is likely to emerge from that roundtable about this particular area? What are your expectations?
Well, the power sector is one that affects each and every single one of us. So you can imagine the interest in that roundtable session. I was not at the breakout session for that, but they came back to the plenary and told us the different things. We heard from a generation company, power generation company, we heard from the transmission company, and we heard from one of the distribution companies.
Did they say anything that captured your imagination, or were you sort of rolling your eyes and saying, Christ, here we go again?
The key is implementation. The solutions have been around, so I wouldn't say I heard anything new. Cost-reflective tariffs, and so on. So it's well documented, and we're well aware of the things that need to happen. What we need is the political will to do those things.
A bit like the currency that he's talking about.
The
Right.
political will to do those things, and government consistency. This is the number one constraint to infrastructure financing. We've had a few infrastructure projects. They've all had problems. Some have been successful, and we need to learn the lessons of the successful ones in order to apply to future infrastructure projects.
But what about, I mean, you were there as well. I mean, the Minister of Power was there.
He was.
What did the Minister of Power actually say? I mean, because I mean, she made a very good point about this political will, which has been a hindrance for a long time. What did he say?
Well, my view on power is very simple. It is a capital good and it's not a social good. Nobody has a right to power. If you need power, you pay for it. The notion of pricing a tariff in a social manner so that everybody can have power, to me, is the single biggest impediment to power in Nigeria. Now, a lot of the distribution companies are doing small deals with estates where they guarantee them 20 hours power and they pay a much higher tariff. We must let these companies charge what the market.
But I mean, in a country that is ravaged by poverty, and poverty is growing,
yes.
I mean, most of Nigerians are poor. They're not going to be able to afford to pay that.
Then they shouldn't
But
have. Then they shouldn't have power.
We're paying more now.
They shouldn't have power.
They're
But it's a
actually-
capital good. Look, when the phones came into Nigeria, the SIM card cost 70,000 naira.
That is true.
And it's because those companies made so much money from the phones that they created the supply, which has driven down the prices so that now SIM cards are free. If you make the richest people, and the people who need the power the most, the industries, the establishments, if they pay the proper price of power, these power companies will be jumping over themselves to create more power because they'll be making a profit on every the power they sell. Now they're taking a loss on the power they sell. They are not making the necessary investments. They are not growing the supply, and they're owed a lot of money because there's an implied subsidy in the power tariff. We should have the political will to say, let these power companies charge the market price. And when they say cost-reflective tariff, that is just a political expression. I don't know what it means. Whose cost and who's reflecting it? Let them charge what the market will bear, and you will see power in Nigeria within 5 years.
That's a good point. It's always struck me, for example, this fuel subsidy thing. I mean, because when I'm in the UK and I'm going to the petrol station, to fill my car costs me about £100.
Yes.
Which is about, 40-something thousand naira to fill the car. I mean, if you sort of think about it in those terms. And in Nigeria, it'll cost me about 10,000 naira or so to fill the car. And I mean, it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? But I mean, the point is that you can't say to people, put petrol in your car at the cost of 40-something thousand naira. I mean, that's just, it's not going to work in this country, is it?
Well, the truth is that most Nigerians in my village, they have diesel and petrol generators. So they are actually paying more for power today. So it's a myth that Nigerians will not pay for power. We will.
Yeah, but the point is that if they don't have the money, then they'll simply shut down their generators, which a lot of people do. But when you're forced to make the payment every single month, that could possibly put people in quite a bit of debt. I mean, I imagine these are considerations that governments think about.
The converse of that is that most of these people run small businesses which rely on power. More power, more business, more money to pay back the power companies. It's a cycle. But power and infrastructure generally are fundamental. They are the basics of which any other economic activity thrives. So if we do not solve that, we will not be able to get the growth that we're looking for.
No, you're absolutely right.
But Charles, we said the same thing when we deregulated diesel.
When what, sorry?
When diesel is deregulated.
Right.
And we use diesel at the market price. So why is PMS the only thing that should be subsidized? We don't subsidize kerosene, we don't subsidize diesel, but we don't subsidize aviation fuel. These are all products from the same crude oil that we're talking about. But PMS is the special one that must be subsidized. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you have a point there. Now, I mean, do you think the remit for this roundtable discussion was a little too broad? I mean, because there's so many issues, I mean, in Nigeria, for example. Would it be better to narrow the scope of these sort of discussions and say, for example, we're talking about diversification of the economy, let's focus on that, and let's, you know, although obviously there's an sort of relationship between the different arms, but I'm just wondering if it just gets too complicated and unwieldy, and in the end, nothing's done about it.
One of the biggest problems in life is to make a complex thing simple or to make a simple thing complex. A modern economy is necessarily complex. There's not one thing you can say. Somebody can't say, if I lower interest rates, it will solve all the problems. Yes, it is necessarily complex, it's necessarily broad, and the people who drive it should be able to take in all the complexities so that when something is wrong somewhere, they know how to fix it somewhere else. So there's no way, in my opinion, of simplifying a modern economy. It's necessarily a complex thing.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's a good point at which to take a break. And we'll come back for the last, for those of you who are beginning to sort of say, good God, when is it going to come? I mean, it's a fascinating discussion, but we've got the last segment of the program coming up immediately after this, and we shall talk about the rest of the issues that are still seen as quite nettlesome when it comes to growing the Nigerian economy. Stay with us. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the roundtable on going for growth organized by the Nigerian Central Bank. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolo. Now, 3 years after Nigeria emerged from recession, the country is still faced with a low growth rate, a far cry from better days less than a decade ago. The Nigerian government has been battling to reverse the economic slump, faced with the challenges of rising inflation, growing poverty, and diversifying an oil-dependent economy. The country's central bank has been holding a round-table discussion to try to steer both the public and the private sectors in the direction of finding creative ways to stimulate growth. But at least one prominent Nigerian banker and entrepreneur is boycotting the event. He's displeased with the dethronement of the Emir of Kano, who is the former governor of the central bank. More on that in a moment. But first, here's a final clip from that roundtable session organized by the Nigerian Central Bank.
For the first time, under the current CBN governor, we now have rice pyramid. That is the role that central bank is beginning to play to boost and blossom the economy of Nigeria. I think he assumed the banking sector is solid as a rock. But is it really solid as a rock? I know the gentlemen in the front row, I'm seeing them, they are all nodding that yes. But let's also see how it could be sustained. In many ways, yes, I believe the Nigerian banking industry is solid as rock, but we need to sustain them. One particular industry that we know in Nigeria here that we can look at as our own comparative advantage is not really manufacturing, it's not really agriculture, it's not really services, it is financial market, financial services, banking. Why is it a comparative advantage in relation to African countries? It is simple. Nigerian banks, financial services, have done extremely well. In 2004, before consolidation, all the Nigerian banks put together, I think the total market cap then was below 12 billion. And this is true. But today, and all of them put together could not even lend 1/10 of what the clay cement industries needed. They couldn't. But today, ladies and gentlemen, one of the top tier banks, tier 1 banks, any one of them is much larger than all the Nigerian banks, shareholders' funds put together in 2004.
And that's Jim Ovie, who's a Nigerian banker and entrepreneur. With me in the studio, the former chief executive of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON, Mustapha Chike Obi, who is currently executive vice chairman of Alpha African Advisory, a primary investment advisory firm in West Africa, and the founder and CEO of Henshaw Capital Partners, a private equity firm, Barbara James. She's also a consultant to the World Bank on infrastructure. Thank you for staying with us. And we were talking just before we went on a break about the fact that the World Health Organization has declared the coronavirus now a global pandemic. Of course, Nigeria battling to find ways to cushion the possible, or should I say probable, effects of the coronavirus. Do you think this country is in for a period of macroeconomic threats and shocks?
I think that's a big risk at the minute, and we listened to the Minister of Finance refer to that. So we certainly need to prepare ourselves. The coronavirus has resulted in a decline in the price of oil, and that's a very direct hit on our budget and by extension our economy. And so we will need to look for other sources of financing to finance the budget.
Is that the sort of thing
yes,
that was discussed today?
It was.
Right.
Absolutely.
And what was the upshot of that discussion?
I think the bottom line is we need to get more private capital and private investment into the economy. And we use the limited public and government funds to attract, we leverage the limited government funds to attract private financing. Firstly, domestic private financing through the pension funds, the insurance funds, high net worth individuals, and so on. And in time, the international private capital.
And Mustapha Chike Obi, we were talking about this a little earlier, that even though this, on the face of it, sounds like, I mean, it sounds like a jolly good thing to do, bring all these people together. I mean, there were people who didn't turn up. I mean, one of the most highly respected bankers in Nigeria, Atedo Peterside, actually wrote a letter boycotting it. And I understand that the Economic Advisory Council, which is the government's official advisory council, didn't attend either.
Well, obviously, I disagree with both of them. I must disclose that the emir, the deposed emir, is a very close personal friend. He's the primary reason I left the US to come back to Nigeria to take the AMCON job. So we have a very good relationship.
That's Sanusi.
Yes, Sanusi. And Atedo Peterside is also a very close personal friend. I was one of the original investors in the Stanbic IBTC at the time. I was one of
Which is the bank he founded.
Yes, one of the originals. In fact, my name was one of the names that was submitted to CBN as one of the directors. So I've known both for a long time. But I think Atedo's protest was misdirected. I don't think the CBN governor and his roundtable had anything to do with Sanusi's being deposed. And so I think that while it's okay to protest, I think he was protesting to the wrong place. That's my view on Atedo's letter, which was well written. I just think it was addressed to the wrong person.
Right.
So, and as good a friend as Sanusi is, I didn't see any reason why I shouldn't attend the roundtable, because we're talking about Nigeria's future.
Yes, I think you have a point.
Those are two separate things.
Right.
As for the Economic Advisory Council, I am baffled by the position attributed to them that they didn't think they should attend this roundtable. The whole idea is for them to listen to as broad, and if we're saying the same thing that they're saying, then that's good. That's reinforcement for the ideas. If we're bringing in new ideas that they didn't think about, then they should go back and add it to. We're not duplicating their roles.
Sure.
But they should have at least send one person.
I mean, they should complement each other.
Yes, somebody should have come to listen. So I don't understand if it's true that they are boycotting this event, then I'm baffled by that position.
Right, okay. Well, we've got less than a minute before we have to bring the program to an end. What do you expect will be the outcome of this roundtable consultation? Will there be a document produced that will be used as a template to shape the Nigerian economy going forward? I mean, that is until, of course, someone else comes up with a better idea, which usually happens.
Well, the immediate outcome, it will be a presentation of the ideas to the president this evening at a dinner. I imagine that the central bank will need to go back and prioritize, because it will be a long list of ideas and recommendations. So they'll need to go back and prioritize what can be done and what will be done in the short term, the medium term, and the long term.
And what do you think should be the priority? I mean, you said they ought to prioritize.
Yes.
What do you reckon ought to be the priority of all the things that happened today?
Well, I'll tell you my priority.
Sure.
And my priority is for us to begin to build those long-term systems, those long-term industries that will solve the fundamental problem.
Okay. I want to thank you very much indeed, Barbara James and Mustafa Chikobi. Absolutely delighted to have both of you here. Thank you ever so much. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.